The film begins in a futuristic Hokkaido, Japan, where artificial intelligence has advanced to the point of harmonious coexistence between humans and robots. We are introduced to Ken Kasugai, an unemployed man who spends his days engrossed in video games. One morning, while he's deep into a game, his wife, Emmy, interrupts him to report that a strange robot has appeared in their backyard and asks him to dispose of it. Uninterested, Ken brushes her off and continues playing, which frustrates Emmy. In the backyard, he discovers the peculiar robot sitting under a tree. When Ken asks for its identity, the robot, startled, flips over. After a moment, it introduces itself as Tang, revealing it has lost its memory. Ken shares his name, and Tang begins to mimic his words in broken Japanese. Ken decides to take the robot to a scrapyard to get rid of it. The scrapyard owner agrees to dismantle Tang for parts, so Ken leaves it there. As he walks away, Tang repeatedly calls out his name, but Ken ignores it. Undeterred, the robot escapes the scrapyard and follows him. Later, Emmy receives a call from the hospital about Ken's missed job interview, learning he never showed up, which surprises her. Just then, Ken arrives home with Tang. The robot curiously investigates the living room, taking tissues from the table, seemingly attracted to Emmy. Enraged, she confronts Ken about his failure to attend the interview. He nonchalantly claims he forgot and reassures her not to worry about finances because of his father's inheritance. This response only fuels Emmy's frustration, and in her anger, she smashes an antique clock on the floor, a sentimental gift from Ken's late father. Hurt, Ken is told by Emmy that it's time to move on from the past, and she kicks him out of the house. Tang follows Ken, pocketing a photo of Emmy and a few tissues. At a bus stop, Ken worries about his situation, contemplating his next move. He notices a liquid leaking from Tang and, curious, opens the robot's hatch to find Adobe Systems inscribed inside. This is the name of the country's leading android manufacturer. After checking their website, Ken learns they offer new robots in exchange for older models. He devises a plan to trade Tang for a newer model that could assist with housework, hoping that this gesture will win Emmy's forgiveness and allow him to return to his carefree gaming lifestyle. The two travel to Fukuoka, where Adobe Systems is headquartered. On the plane, a child sitting in front of Ken throws candy at him. Ken asks the child to stop, but the antics continue, prompting him to call the kid a brat. Tang echoes the insult repeatedly, leading to an awkward situation, which makes Ken snap at the robot, calling it worthless and threatening to discard it. This only exacerbates the situation as Tang releases steam from its head in response. Upon arriving at the Adobe office, Ken attempts to exchange Tang for one of the latest models. However, the receptionist informs him that Tang isn't recognized in their system and merely contains some components from their company. She apologizes and explains that they can't process the exchange. Meanwhile, a man named Shinji is leading a group of children on a tour of the facility. When the kids spot Tang, they eagerly gather around to take pictures, clearly fascinated by the robot. In a show of compassion, Tang saves a ladybug from being stepped on, impressing Shinji, who turns out to be one of the lead robot designers at Adobe. He asks Ken for permission to examine Tang, and Ken agrees. Shinji brings them to his office, where he discovers a glass tube inside Tang filled with yellow fluid. Noticing a small crack in the tube, he realizes it's the robot's fuel and performs a makeshift repair. He warns Ken that if the fluid runs out, Tang will cease to function. Shinji also observes that Tang displays high intelligence and emotional responses, almost human-like. He stresses the importance of taking care of the robot. Meanwhile, someone is watching them through Tang's camera on a monitor. Shinji then mentions his friend Suki Rin, a robotics expert living in Shenzhen, China. He urges Ken to visit her as she is the only one capable of fixing Tang. Ken is reluctant about traveling so far, but when Shinji insists it's the only option to save the robot, he reluctantly agrees. A few hours later, two mysterious men arrive at the Adobe office, demanding to know Tang's location from Shinji. Sensing danger, a frightened Shinji ends up divulging the information. Meanwhile, Ken and Tang land in Shenzhen and visit Atsuki the next day. She is thrilled to see them and warmly embraces Tang, expressing her excitement about finally meeting the robot. While Atsuki and Ken chat, Tang notices a remote-controlled car and chases after it. However, it turns out to be a trap. The two mysterious men capture the robot and lock it in their van before driving off. When the adults realize what has happened, they sprint after the vehicle but can't keep up. Luckily, Atsuki manages to toss her ID card with a GPS tracker into the van. Once again, someone is seen monitoring the situation through Tang's camera. That evening, Ken and Atsuki track the GPS signal to a warehouse. Moments later, Ken receives a call from Emi. She tells him that she can't babysit him anymore and admits that his absence has actually made her feel better. She decides to leave his parents' house, which takes Ken by surprise and leaves him feeling distraught. Despite his emotional turmoil, he respects her choice and hangs up. We see Emmy is not entirely content with her decision as she breaks down in tears, missing Ken. Back at the warehouse, the door swings open and Ken brushes off his feelings as he and Atsuki enter. They spot the two kidnappers lounging around and heading upstairs for beers. Seizing the moment, Ken and Atsuki quickly grab Tang and prepare to escape. Just then, a man named Dr. Kato appears, revealing himself as the boss of the kidnappers. He halts their escape and inspects Tang's components, recognizing them and muttering that they must have been created by Professor Baba. At this point, Dr. Kato's henchmen arrive downstairs and capture Tang. Ken insists that he doesn't need the trashy robot and was simply trying to get rid of it. This infuriates Tang, causing it to start releasing steam from its body, just as it had on the plane. The two henchmen are thrown off by this and let the robot go. It turns out that Ken had planned this all along to create a distraction. He and Atsuki quickly engage the kidnappers in a fight. In the end, Atsuki manages to snatch a taser gun from one of the henchmen and knocks him out. She then points the weapon at the remaining two and urges Ken to escape with Tang. Ken flees the warehouse with Tang, but he soon notices that the robot is leaking. Suddenly, he receives a video call from an unrecognized number. When he answers, it's Professor Baba, Tang's creator. Baba is thrilled to see the robot, addressing it as James, and thanks Ken for caring for his child. He invites them to Makakujima Island, revealing that Tang has the potential to change the world and promises to repair it. In the next scene, Ken and Tang arrive at Makakujima Island and sit down to take in the stunning scenery. During this moment, Ken opens up to Tang about his troubled past, revealing his childhood dream of becoming a doctor. He recounts an incident where he worked as a medical intern. During a shift, his father was admitted following a tragic accident. With all the doctors unavailable, the nurses turned to Ken for guidance, but he was paralyzed with fear and couldn't help. By the time a doctor finally arrived an hour later, it was too late. His father had already passed away. Since that day, Ken confesses that he has struggled to trust himself, leading to his complete withdrawal from work and a sense of failure towards his wife. Tang, sensing Ken's sorrow, tries to cheer him up with a playful dance, which brings a smile to Ken's face. Shortly after, they arrive at Baba's house, where the professor warmly greets them and expresses gratitude to Ken for bringing James home. Baba explains that the robot has been missing for years due to a lab accident. He then replaces the broken tube in Tang's hatch with a new one, explaining that it contains bioethanol fuel made from local sugarcane. However, Tang appears frightened and tries to hide behind Ken, who realizes he isn't in a position to take the robot back. Despite Tang clinging to his feet and begging to go home with him, Ken walks away heavy-hearted. As he walks, Ken encounters Dr. Kato, who is headed to Baba's house. Kato grows anxious upon learning that Ken handed Tang over to the professor. He then recounts an incident from 5 years prior when he worked with Baba on the James series, a military robot project. During a training session, one of the robots developed a sense of fear, leading to a catastrophic panic response that resulted in a massacre. Kato reveals that Baba viewed this emotional response as a breakthrough in AI, leading him to remove the Euro chip from James and attach it to another robot. Afterward, Baba burned down the lab and fled. Kato explains that they have been searching for Baba for years to arrest him. Concerned, Ken takes Kato's car and rushes to save his friend. Back at Baba's house, a professor tries to extract the Euro chip from Tang, but the frightened robot escapes from him. Ken arrives just in time and heads straight into the lab. He finds Tang, and they attempt to escape, but Baba quickly seals all the doors using his computer system. Kato, who has just arrived, finds himself stuck outside and unable to get in. Baba then reveals to Ken that he has been monitoring him through Tang's camera the entire time. He taunts Ken, calling him a loser for being trapped in the past and unable to support his family. Baba then discloses his sinister plan to harness the robot's intelligence to become the most powerful man in the world. As Baba approaches Tang with a hatchet, Ken intervenes, confronting the professor. Baba questions why Ken would help a robot, which he sees as nothing more than a machine. Ken defends Tang, insisting that it is his friend. The professor is angered by Ken's response and attacks him with a robotic arm. However, Ken and Tang collaborate to seize the arm, and in the end, Ken uses it to knock the old man unconscious. Just when it seems they've overcome the threat, a heavy cupboard crashes down, trapping Tang underneath. Ken rushes to rescue the robot, but its fuel leaks, leaving it immobile. He attempts to replace the fuel tube, but Tang remains unresponsive. Realizing he can't do this alone, Ken video calls Kato, who advises him to check if the cable leading to the battery is connected. Upon inspecting it, Ken finds the cord is broken, prompting him to grab a nearby tool to fix it. Kato then instructs him to connect the core unit. Ken discovers 2 sockets and asks which one to use, but Kato warns that only Baba knows the answer. He cautions Ken that failure to connect the correct socket could result in a short circuit, destroying Tang. This dire situation causes Ken to hesitate as memories of his father's surgery flood back to him. Nevertheless, he summons his courage and randomly chooses a socket. Fortunately, his guess is correct and Tang begins to awaken, albeit with no memories. The robot introduces itself as James. A distraught Ken tells the robot that its name is Tang and recounts their story and how they ended up in this predicament. To Ken's surprise, this triggers Tang's memories, indicating it is capable of feeling emotions. Eventually, Tang calls Ken by name and expresses love for him. Overjoyed, Ken replies that he loves Tang too. In the next scene, several police officers arrive and arrest Professor Baba. Ken then heads home with Tang, where he finds Emmy preparing to leave. He notices that she has repaired his father's antique clock, bringing him immense joy. But wants to stop her, he's too afraid to speak up. Sensing this, Tang plays a recorded message of Ken, where he declares his intention to become a doctor again and move on from the past. He expresses his determination to be a better person and win Emmy back. Moved by this message, Emmy decides to forgive Ken. Tearfully, Ken apologizes for everything and promises to be a better husband. The movie concludes with the couple sharing a passionate kiss after covering Tang's eyes with a cloth. Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like to support the channel. Thank you for watching.